So good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Last Sabbath, we had our joint worship again, but 2 Sabbaths ago, we studied on Hannah and her faithful prayer, how her prayers were answered, and how God had turned her insecurity into a blessing. And she was no longer barren. She had only asked for 1 child, and she ended up with 6. And one of those children was a very, very special one. Samuel, who became a prophet, a very, very influential and important person. So today we're going to start with 1 Samuel, if you have your Bibles, chapter 2, verse 11. You can use your actual Bible or on your phones. So Hannah brought Samuel to serve in the temple as she had promised, and she left him there with priest Eli. Okay? So that is verse 11. Both Hannah and Elkanah, of course, Elkanah had to agree to do this. And so they left Samuel at the temple to be mentored by priest Eli. But there was a problem. There was a problem. So what was the problem? Verse 12. So we're looking at 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 12 now. What was the problem? Eli's sons were evil men. They did not care about the Lord. Now, if you look at, I've talked about using different Bible versions. I'm not sure what kind of version you're using, but if you look at the King James Version, actually, there is a different word that is used. So when I looked it up, it says in the King James Version, it says, now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord. And when I read that, I was like, Belial? I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. Belial? Belial. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 12. So now when I read it in the King James Version, I saw this B word, sons of Belial. Was wondering, what does that mean? Sons of Belial. And so usually when you have a question about one part of the Bible, another part of the Bible answers that question. Okay, so I looked at 2 Corinthians 6:15, and it gave me the answer to what Belial is. Please forgive me if I'm saying that incorrectly. Belial, I'm not sure how else to say it. 2 Corinthians 6:15. And so it says, it tells you what it is. How can Christ and Belial, who is the devil, have any agreement? What can a believer have together with a non-believer? That's the verse in 2 Corinthians. So what does sons of Belial mean? Sons of the devil. Okay, so when you're thinking, in my version it says, verse 12, it says, Eli's sons were evil men. They did not care about the Lord. That's a bit of an understatement compared to sons of Belial. Okay, so when we're talking about the sons were evil, they're actually being described as the sons of Satan, the devil. Verse 17, this sin of the young men was very great in the Lord's sight. Why were the sins of Hophni and Phinehas, who were priest Eli's sons, so great? Why are Hophni and Phinehas being called the sons of Belial or the devil? Because, verse 17 says, they were treating the Lord's offering with contempt. Now, if we think about the tabernacle and the symbolic services of the tabernacle, of every piece that was in the sanctuary, everything that priest Eli was to do, why was it important? It was symbolic. What was it symbolic of? It was representing, looking forward to the sacrifice of Jesus. So all that they were doing in the tabernacle was a representation of Jesus' sacrifice. But think about the significance of Hophni and Phinehas degrading that. No wonder Satan would want to do that, because they were actually degrading the sacrifice of the Messiah. And not only were they making the people think of the tabernacle and the symbolic services and all of that that was supposed to represent Jesus' sacrifice in a hateful way, but the way that Hophni and Phinehas, because remember they were priests also in the temple, the way that they were doing these, conducting themselves and conducting the offerings, made the people feel hatred and resentment toward the services of the sanctuary. So no wonder, verse 17 says, their sin was very great. And so because of Hophni and Phinehas's behavior and lack of reverence, the people stopped coming to worship God at the temple. Now, Hophni and Phinehas, they were used to the sanctuary and the temple because who was their father? The priest. So since childhood, they had heard about all of the sanctuary symbolism and the procedures of everything, but it didn't have meaning to them. Priest Eli did not correct them in their disobedient and irreverent services. They didn't attach meaning to what they were doing. They had just grown up with this. This was something that they saw their father doing, and they just didn't really understand the meaning behind it and why it was important, and they didn't really care, actually. And Priest Eli did not do his part as a father in teaching them and in correcting them. This was a family that was set apart by God. This is a priest's family. So, in other words, nowadays we can say any one of us, right? Even though your father may not be a pastor, maybe he's an elder, or maybe he's a deacon, or maybe he's a believer. Okay, so this is a family that was set apart by God. In fact, Eli's ancestor was Aaron, Moses' brother. So you know that Aaron played a very, very important part, right? And this is the legacy of their family. They were promised, Aaron and his descendants was promised to walk before God forever, but there was a condition. And what was the condition to the promise? If you want to receive God's blessing, can you receive God's blessing if you're walking away from Him? You cannot. You can receive God's blessing if you're close to Him, if you're communing with Him, if your life is involved with Him. Unfortunately, Eli and his sons, they had gone through this period of testing, but they were found lacking. They were given this legacy, they were given this position and this privilege, but they did not honor it. They did not understand the God that they were supposed to be serving. All they could see was the position. Oh, we are Priest Eli's sons, so we have entitlement. We are important. Oh, these things, these sacrifices and things that we're doing is just a part of the job. And so they lowered the service of the Lord in the eyes of the people. What a great sin. Now, to contrast this, okay, we have Hophni and Phinehas on one hand, and on the other hand, who was placed in this situation? Who was just dropped off at the tabernacle? Samuel. So now let's turn to verse 18. So right after verse 17, now description of Hophni and Phinehas, now we have a description of someone else, Samuel. And how is Samuel described? Verse 18. So we are in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 18. But Samuel obeyed the Lord. he wore a linen holy vest. Now, I mentioned the last time when we were learning about Hannah and Samuel that he actually was placed in sanctuary services sooner than usual. So usually when people reached the age of 25, then they were established in the tabernacle services. But Samuel started even before, even when he was young. It says he wore a linen holy vest. Have you seen those pictures where the priest has this breastplate of different colors? Okay, that was for the high priest. This one was a little different. In fact, David also wore one of these. But nonetheless, even though it was different than the one the high priest wore, it was still symbolic. It still was a physical representation that Samuel is set apart. Samuel is faithful. He is humble. He is serving God. Now, imagine, you remember we talked 2 weeks ago also about the evil situation of the people where Eli misunderstood Hannah because she was fervently praying and he was like, oh, she's like just everybody else. She's drunk. So in this situation, it's not just society, it's actually in the temple. And here, Elkanah and Hannah are leaving their precious prayed for Samuel in this situation. Usually, parents, we want to protect our children, right? We want the best environment for them. But sometimes God allows his child to be put in a situation like this to prove to the universe that even if you are in an evil environment, you can still be a person of integrity. Your surroundings do not determine who you are. Your surroundings do not determine your choices or your path. You have the choice, and you can choose which path to follow. Now, in verse 22 and 25, we see that Eli, he tries to correct his sons. But after so long, when Eli is trying to correct his sons in a very light way, do you think it's very beneficial? Do you think Hophni and Phinehas are like, ooh, our dad is saying, no, we shouldn't do this. Oh, we have to listen. Doesn't really matter. They don't pay any attention to what their father is saying. It doesn't really matter. Virtue is not inherited. Virtue is acquired. What does that mean? Just because your father is the pastor or just because your father is the priest doesn't mean you are holy. It doesn't mean that is your choice. You have to choose for yourself. And when you choose your path for yourself, can you just be indifferent about it? Once you make your choice, you have to act on your choice. And so, the sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, they chose not to continue the legacy of their family. Now, here is where we see God's mercy, okay? Now, even the people surrounding them were so irritated by Hophni and Phinehas. They could see what Hophni and Phinehas were doing, and they're like, oh, these guys, they call themselves priests? Look at what they're doing. Look at what kind of people they are. But even in that situation, God was merciful. How do we know that? Because God gave them time. He knows that we need time. Character development takes time because sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we have a bad day. Sometimes, especially in early adolescence is between the ages of 10 and 15, we have a lot of choices to make. We're changing. Our bodies are changing. Our minds are changing and growing. There's a lot of adjustments. And God is patient and God is merciful to a point. And we also talked about this, that mercy does not continue to be mercy past a certain point. Once you reach a certain point and you've made your decision once and for all, mercy is not mercy. Actually, justice is merciful. And this is what happens to Hophni and Phinehas. They ignored all the warnings that God was trying to give them. Now, on the other hand, now we're comparing now. Continue to verse 26. This is Hophni and Phinehas on one side and Samuel on the other side. Verse 26, what does that tell us? Verse 26, the boy Samuel kept growing. He pleased God and the people. So even the people knew the difference between Hophni and Phinehas, who were supposed to be the priest's sons, and Samuel. Now, we're talking about God's mercy and how God is giving them time. But how much time? Even though God's plan might be paused for a certain amount of time because he's waiting for us, giving us a chance in his mercy, does that halt God's plan? Is God's plan prevented completely or fail? No. God's plan continues to move on, continues to move forward. And so Samuel remained faithful to God, and because of that, God was able to use him. Now, let's think about this from Samuel's point of view. Okay? So his mother taught him from when he was little, okay? From when he was a baby. Now he goes to serve in the tabernacle and he hears from priest Eli about God. Okay, so he has like overload. Okay, so he's getting spirituality from everywhere. Okay, his mom has been teaching him. I'm sure his dad was teaching him. Priest Eli's teaching him. He's being mentored in the temple. And he's like, yeah, I get it. God's principles. Yeah. But then he's looking around at society. Okay, and he's looking at Hophni and Phinehas. And he's like, okay, so these are God's principles. And I'm doing my part in choosing them, but what about everybody else? I mean, how can Hophni and Phinehas not follow God's principles and still be the priests, right? How can this be happening? Did God's plan change? Did God's principles change? Is God okay with all this that is going on? And I'm sure Samuel must have been thinking like sometimes we think as well. We're doing our part. We're trying to follow God's principles. Sometimes we feel like this, we talked about this morning, this burden, right? And we feel like we hear it from our parents, we hear it from our pastor, we hear it from our teachers and all this, and we're trying to do our best. But then, look at all these other people, right? In Hophni and Phinehas, they were doing so much worse. I mean, come on, they're called the sons of Satan. I mean, that tells you exactly what kind of people they were, right? So Samuel must have been thinking. But what he didn't know was how long God had waited for one person. Imagine, in that society, that evil society, with all those things, God was like looking, well, maybe this person will allow me in their life and I can do amazing things. Oh, nope. I guess they didn't choose me. Okay, well, maybe this person, and God is waiting and watching. Will this person accept me in his life so that I can use him? Well, nope, guess not. And God is looking and God is waiting, and finally he sees Samuel. And the same thing could happen to us. I think it's safe for me to say that our society right now is such that it's very sinful and evil. Things are happening every single day, terrible things. In our society right now, we can say that it's pretty much the same as this society here that we're talking about. But maybe, welcome, but maybe God is waiting for one person. Just like he was waiting for Samuel, he is waiting for one person who is going to commit their lives to me, who is going to trust me, who is going to persevere. In this case, it was Samuel. But how many of us right now are willing to make the same commitment? Because although God is allowing these things to happen on this earth, we know that the time will be cut short, right? The time will end of the mercy and the time that God is giving to the people. And what is our decision going to be? Now, we continue to chapter 3 now. Verse 1 says, "The boy Samuel served the Lord under Eli. In those days, the Lord did not speak directly to people very often. There were very few visions." And this is kind of like a really sad part. We can understand why God was not giving visions to many people at that time, because we're talking about how sinful the time was. But this also included Eli. It came to the point where God actually stopped speaking to Eli as well. How sad. God did not have someone that he could communicate with that was following him, loving him, trusting him, being faithful to him, and choosing him until one night. Samuel goes to bed. And he's all snuggled up in bed. And I tell this as a children's story, or I have told this as a children's story. And so forgive me if I tend to, in this part, get a little bit excited and dramatic. Okay? So I tell the kids usually, pretend you're all snuggled up in bed. Okay? Have you ever had this, especially with this winter that we've had? I can't wait to get into bed under the covers because it's so nice and warm. So pretend you're Samuel and you've had a long day of work and you finally get into bed, okay? Because at this time, Eli is quite old. So Samuel is doing a lot of work. He's tired. He gets into bed. He's all snuggled up. He's just about falling asleep. And then he hears someone calling his name. Oh, has that ever happened to you? Maybe not in bed, but maybe you're in the middle of something and your mom calls you. Oh, Mom, what do you want? Right? You feel bothered.
Very lazy.
You feel lazy.
Yeah.
Okay? But Samuel had a choice. He could say, I can pretend I didn't hear and just fall asleep, or I can go see what Eli is needing. And so he made the choice to go and check on Eli. So he gets out of bed and he goes to see Eli and he says, "Yes, Eli, I am here. What do you need?" Right? Like a good boy. And he's trying to do his best. And what does Eli say to him? "Huh? I didn't call you. What are you doing here? Let me sleep. Go back to bed." Right? Samuel must be thinking, that's not nice. That's not fair. Right? I'm doing my best to be obedient. I guess I was hearing things. Maybe Eli wasn't calling me. So he goes back to bed. And it takes a little minute, right? Tossing and turning. Sometimes you can't find that spot, the right spot. He finds the right spot. And he's so comfortable. And he's just about falling asleep. And he hears his name again. And he says, "No, Eli is calling me. I can hear." So he could have said, maybe he's not. I'm going to pretend. Last time I went, he says no. So I'm going to ignore him. I'm going to go to sleep. Did Samuel do that? No, he didn't. So he took the effort. The laziness was not there. He sacrificed his comfort, right? He gets out of bed and he goes to Eli. He says, "Yes, Eli, I am here. How can I help you?" And Eli looks at him and says, "What's the matter with you? I told you. I didn't call you. Stop disturbing me. I'm an old man. I want to sleep." And so Samuel goes back to bed. Okay, Eli is not calling me. Now, a third time, Samuel hears the voice. Now, by 3 times, would you get up and go again? Not only is it not comfortable, but the guy said he didn't call. Maybe he didn't call. Maybe it's the wind. He could easily have justified himself by not going, right? Easily. But no. He knew he heard someone calling him, and he was faithful, and he went to priest Eli. Now, from priest Eli's perspective, if he's a priest, he should have known, right? He should have clicked something, but he didn't. Third time, he goes, he says, Eli, I am here. You called me. How can I help you? And then, finally, something clicked. And priest Eli's like, oh, maybe God. Because remember at the time, no visions, right? God was not talking to his people. So it took Eli a minute. And then all of a sudden, Eli is like, is God actually speaking to somebody? And instructs Samuel what to do. Go back to your bed and say, this is verse 9, go back to your bed, and if you hear the voice again, say, speak, Lord, I am your servant, and I am listening. So Samuel went and lay down in the bed. Verse 10, the Lord came and stood there. He called as he had before. He said, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, speak, Lord, I am your servant, and I am listening. And in that conversation between God and Samuel, God shared some important information about priest Eli to Samuel. Now, if you think about priest Eli's night, he knew that God was calling Samuel, and he's lying in his bed thinking, what is God saying to Samuel? He must have wondered all night because he knew that God had warned him before about his sons. And he knew he had this feeling, this is about me. This is about my sons. This is about my family. And he was waiting all night. Finally, first thing in the morning, they wake up and priest Eli goes right to Samuel and says, Samuel, tell me, what did God say? Now imagine poor Samuel, right? He's reluctant. He loves priest Eli. Priest Eli is an old man, right? He's supposed to respect him and revere him as the priest. And here he has this terrible message to share with priest Eli. But he did. He told priest Eli, and priest Eli accepted. Now, is it always easy to be a mouthpiece for God? Is it always easy to be God's messenger? No. We've talked about this before in Sabbath school. It is very, very difficult to speak God's message sometimes when it's hurtful to the other person, or it's bad news, or you're telling someone they're wrong. It's not easy. But Samuel did it. And God promises that if we are faithful in doing what he has called us to do, the rest is up to him. He will do all the rest, but all we have to do is that one initial part, and God will be faithful in all the rest. And is that true? Is it true? Let's see, verse 19. What happens? The Lord was with Samuel as he grew up. He did not let any of Samuel's messages fail to come true. Was God faithful to Samuel? Yes, he was. Verse 20. Then all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew Samuel was a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord continued to show himself to Samuel at Shiloh. He also showed himself to Samuel through his word. And then the beginning of chapter 4. It's very strange in some verses you'll see in the Bible. It says chapter 4, but there's one sentence before chapter 4. And it says, news about Samuel spread through all of Israel. Now, I am sure news about Hophni and Phinehas spread through all of Israel, but was this the same? Whereas everybody was disgruntled with Hophni and Phinehas, now they finally have someone who is acting like a priest, someone who is their moral leader. And news spread all around. You know Hophni and Phinehas? Well, now we got a real priest, Samuel. Chapter 4 is very sad For me, I felt very sad reading this. Here in chapter 4, we see that Israel is fighting against the Philistines. Okay? And unfortunately, Israel lost. They were defeated. And do you know how many soldiers the Philistines killed? Israelite soldiers? 4,000 Israelite soldiers. That's a lot of men. 4,000 died. And Israel was so discouraged because God had called Israel before, right? Go into battle, and they won. They were victorious. But what happened? They lost. They were so discouraged that they lost 4,000 men. And then some of them had a good idea, they thought, okay, which was a terrible idea. They said, oh, we have a good idea. Every time we go to battle, we win. The Ark of the Covenant has the power, right? We're going to go and get it, and we're going to bring it to battle. And when we have the Ark of the Covenant, we're going to win this battle. And so what do? They go and get the Ark of the Covenant. Now here we see two problems. First problem, they looked on the Ark as sort of like a magical object. So their superstition, the influence of the pagans around them influenced them, that they actually believed that there was power in the Ark of the Covenant. They were influenced by the superstition around them. Was there power in the Ark of the Covenant? In the Ark itself, no. What was in the Ark that gave it the power? God's presence. God's presence was the one that gave them the power. Why did they win all the battles before? Because God's presence. God was with them. God had asked them to go into battle. And when God asks you to do it, He follows through. He never lets you fail. We saw that with Samuel, right? And so they misunderstood that the Ark of the Covenant would somehow help them win this battle. And so they actually, who was the leaders of this? Getting the Ark? Who had the inside connections? Hophni and Phinehas. They go and they get the Ark and they bring the Ark into battle. And what happens in the second battle? Terrible. What happens? Israel is defeated. Now, the first time, how many soldiers were killed? 4,000 is a lot. Have you seen 4,000 people? If you go outside in a parade or something, 4,000 people is a lot of people.
Yeah, just you see that only in stadiums. Yeah.
In the stadiums, it's more.
Yeah.
It's more like this now, what I'm talking about. Now, the first time was 4,000. Now, after they brought the Ark of the Covenant into the battle, how many Israelite soldiers were defeated?
15, maybe.
30,000. That is like a stadium. Can you imagine, like a stadium, all those men killed? So actually, 34,000 Israelites were killed. When the Philistines saw the Ark of the Covenant coming, actually, in a way, the Philistines had more faith than the Israelites. Because when the Philistines saw the Ark coming, they knew the power of this God of Israel. And they knew, oh no, before we were defeated so badly, if we want to keep our life, when they saw that Ark, we have to fight. We have to really fight like never before to save our life. And so they did, and they fought back because they believed in their little faith, the light that has been given to them, in their experience of the God of Israel. They believed that they were in trouble. What they didn't know was that God was not with the Israelites. And so they fought back really hard and they killed 30,000 Israelite soldiers. They actually defeated Israel so much that the Israelite soldiers did not even run away back to the camp. You know where they ran? They ran all the way back home. It was such a terrible, terrible battle. They actually were so afraid and discouraged they ran all the way home because they had put their decisions, their power, their plans first. They had no understanding of God. They had no communion with God. They had no relationship with God. They did not even ask God, what should we do? We have been defeated. What do we do, God? Help us, God. Did they turn to God? No, they didn't. They turned to themselves and their good ideas, which were terrible ideas. And they lost 30,000 men. That is catastrophic. It's a tragedy. Now, meanwhile, okay, not only did they lose that many men, now in the battle, the Philistines, they've won, they've taken the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, that is terrible, okay? This Ark, where God's presence was in, now is in the hands of the Philistines. This is terrible. Terrible. And the messenger from the battle comes. Now, when Hophni and Phinehas came to get the ark, Eli said, don't do it. They, of course, did not listen to their father. They had never listened to their father before. They're not going to listen to their father now. Eli was sitting at the road, the city gate, on a chair. At the time, there were no cell phones, no texting, no way of communicating. He was waiting to hear what is happening in the battle. What is happening with the ark, God's ark of the covenant. He was sitting on the chair until he sees a messenger coming. Somebody is coming. And this messenger says, your sons have been killed. Of course, this is very sad. But he had expected that because of the prophecies. He knew. But then he was not expecting what the messenger said after. He said, not only are your sons killed and we've lost 30,000 men, but the Philistines have taken the Ark of the Covenant. It was too much for priest Eli. He was 98 years old. He fell off his chair and broke his neck and died because he was so distraught that the Ark of the Covenant had been taken by the Philistines and it was his sons and it was under his watch. He was the high priest. How could this happen? And you think about the family legacy. This is Aaron's descendants that were set apart for the priesthood, God's service. He had served, Eli had served for 40 years. 40 years as the high priest and the judge in God's work. For him to die like that? In such a tragedy? How terrible of a legacy for Eli and his family, his whole family. And not only that, Phinehas had a wife. And Phinehas' wife was pregnant. And she was about to give birth, and she also heard the news. Now, they say that Phinehas' wife was not like Phinehas, and she was a godly person. When she heard the news that her family, her brother-in-law, her husband, her father-in-law all died, it made her go into labor, but she died because she heard the Ark of the Covenant was taken. And it affected her so much that she actually, just before she died, the midwife who was helping her deliver her child said, don't worry, hang on. Your baby is born. It's okay. But she lost hope. The Ark of the Covenant, God's presence, God's glory is gone from our people. We are devastated. This is a tragedy. And she actually, in her dying words, named her son Ichabod. And do you know what that means? The glory is gone. God's glory and God's presence had left their people, and it was too much, and she died. So much death, so much heartache, so much pain, so much suffering, all because why? Because the Israelites did not rely on God. They were motivated by their own plans, their own strength. They initiated the attack. They thought they knew better. And now, not only did they suffer, but now you remember the Philistines, they were afraid of the God of Israel, right? You remember that they were thinking the Ark of the Covenant. In their little faith, they believed the Ark of the Covenant was their God, right? Represented their God. Now the Philistines had defeated Israel's God in their mind, right? Now they have the Ark of the Covenant. What a terrible witness as believers to non-believers. That where the Philistines had believed in the God of Israel, now because of the people, God's people's lack, now they have taken away the little faith and belief that the Philistines, non-believers, had in the God of Israel. That they actually managed to defeat not only the people, but the God of Israel. As we end today, sometimes, we think, we look around and we see people that we expect to be moral leaders. Could be our parents, could be our teachers, could be anybody. They lack morality. They lack the commitment to God. They lack the principles, the godly principles in their life. And unfortunately, sometimes when leaders are not godly and following God's example, they cause other people to stray as well. But not everyone. Some people, no matter what's going on around them, no matter even if it's someone in an influential position, like a priest, like Priest Eli or Hophni and Phinehas, they choose for themselves to follow God's principles. And this was Samuel's legacy. We could easily say, well, look at all these people. They're not following God, then I don't have to. They're not doing it, so I don't have to. Just like Samuel, he could have said, Eli's not calling me, so I don't have to get up. I'm just going to ignore the voice that's calling me because I'm too comfortable. But what if Samuel ignored God's voice? What if he stayed comfortable? Would we have this amazing prophet and example for us today? Probably God would have chosen someone else. And how sad for Samuel. And it's the same thing with us. God is calling each one of us. And my prayer is that our response to that calling is, yes, I am willing to be that one. I am willing to be the one, even though these things are happening around me, even though all this evil is happening around me and all these other people don't care, I care. And even though these people are not choosing, I choose. Ellen White, she says, there's a quote here, "The youth of our time may become as precious in the sight of God like Samuel. By faithfully maintaining their Christian integrity, they may exert a strong influence in the work of reform. God has a work for every one of them. Never did men achieve greater results for God and humanity than may be achieved in our day by those who will be faithful to their God-given trust. And that, I pray, is our youth right here. Even our parents who are here. Every single one of us, no matter if you're young, no matter if you're old, that each one of us will accept this calling and persevere. And it is perseverance. It's not easy. I have 2 Bible verses that I would like to end with. First, Hebrews 10:36. Hebrews 10:36 says, you need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what has been promised to you. Galatians 6:9, let us not become weary or tired in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. It's not easy, even for someone who is older, who has experience and maturity in the faith. It is not easy. But we have a promise in John 16:33. What is the promise? God says, yes, you will have trouble. Yes, but take heart because I have overcome the world. Jesus has overcome. Jesus is victorious. So we know the end is coming and the end will be victorious for us. All we have to do is persevere and not give up. Yes, we are tired. Yes, we are discouraged. And we don't always have to be that person who is stepping up and doing. Sometimes we need rest and it's okay. But as long as we continue to persevere, because Jesus has overcome the world. And through him, we can too. And that is my prayer this morning. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, in this world of so much sin, it seems like our world is just getting more difficult, more painful, more trouble, more confusion, more disappointment. Sometimes we feel it's impossible to live in this world. Not only to live, but we feel like it's impossible to be a good person. We feel like it's impossible to stand up for our integrity, to be a person of character, to follow your principles, to do what you have called us to do. But yet we know it is possible. Even in the midst of all of that trouble, Samuel was righteous. He was faithful. And even though I am sure he was tired, even though he was discouraged and he doubted, he did not give up. He persevered, and you were faithful to him. And just like you were faithful to Samuel, you will be faithful to each one of us who accept your call, who listen to your voice and get up and go. You will be with us and you will bless us until we are victorious in your name one day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.